Champion Life TV. We are so glad that you tuned in today. There's a great message in store, so let's go straight to Pastor Eddie.
So, are you ready for a good word today? I had a person ask me a question a couple weeks ago. The question they asked me was, what does Jesus do all day? Now, that's a good question. I mean, I'm sure that some of you have wondered that before. What does Jesus do? Is he retired? Because this person had heard someone say that Jesus, when he died on the cross and when he rose again, that the work that he did on the cross was a finished work. It was completed. Everything that Jesus would ever do, he completed in that moment, in that time, in that event, and he'll do nothing else. And this Christian, this saint, this seasoned veteran of God that said this newer believer heard this, they quickly concluded that Jesus must be retired, that he obviously did a lot of work in that 3.5 years, and then it's over. And I know that myself, growing up in church, I've heard that many times, and I'm sure if you think about it, if you've been hanging around church very long, you've heard things like that Jesus, all he ever, that he accomplished everything. How many of you are glad that when Jesus died on that cross, that he became the atonement? See, the wages of sin is death. So what does that mean? If you sin, there's a penalty involved, and the penalty is called death. So if it wasn't for Jesus, this is the way it would play out. You would go through your life, and if you happen to sin, at the end of your life, you'd be punished with eternal death. Now, how many of you know that's not such a good deal? Since the Bible says all have sinned, which means none of us have a chance. So what is atonement? It's the innocent third party that would absorb the penalty that was rightfully yours and mine. Before that first Easter, what would happen is an animal, an unblemished animal, would have to absorb that penalty, and then that person could be free from their sin. But once Jesus died on that cross, he did complete the work. It was a once and for all, taking the sins of the world, becoming that innocent third party that absorbed the penalty that was rightfully ours. I'm sure we really put a lot of weight on him, us, Champion Life Church. But once and for all, it was a finished work. But that does not mean that Jesus is not involved in the lives of people, still involved in a work. In fact, there's a lot of scriptures that I could have used to show this, but I picked a couple today. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 19, this is what it says. God raised him from the dead, and this is speaking of Jesus, and we know that's that event, on the event of that first Easter. God raised him from the dead and set him on a throne in deep heaven in charge of running the universe. So we could stop right there and say, how many of you know that's a pretty tall order? Jesus has been given the job of running the universe, number one. So, you know, when I'm watching the Discovery Channel or I'm watching CNN and they start talking about asteroids hitting the earth and destroying us all in one shot, well, I don't really worry that much about that, because if Jesus is running the universe, my guess is he's not going to let an asteroid hit us and destroy us. Why? He's running the universe. I mean, I think he's done a pretty good job doing things up till now. He's running the universe, everything from galaxies to governments. He's pretty busy, I would say. No name, no power is exempt from his rule, and not just for the time being, but forever. He is in charge of it all and has the final word of authority on everything. At the center of all this, Christ rules the church. I just get your mind wrapped around that for a minute. Jesus is running the universe. Everything from galaxies to governments. All authority has been given to him. There's no name more powerful than him. It starts and stops with him. And he chose to run this, what does it say? At the center of everything, or at the center of all this, Christ rules the church. Listen to this thought. The church, you see, is not peripheral to the world, but the world is peripheral to the church. The church is Christ's body in which he speaks and acts, by which he fills everything with his presence. And your peripheral vision, what does that mean? You know, and I've used this illustration before, but if I stood here and I look at Earl, Pastor Earl, in my peripheral, I can see other things. I can see Sarah over here, and she's wearing kind of a blousey thing and maybe some jeans, and I can see Rachel over here, and I can see the reflection from Mark over here. I can't really see Mark, but in my peripheral, I can see the glow from. That's called, I can see that there's lights above me. I can't really tell which lights are on, but I can tell there's a reflection. I can see there's these gorgeous, gorgeous chairs, these burgundy pews that we have here. I can see them in my peripheral. See, the church you see is not peripheral to the world, but the world is peripheral to the church. What does that mean? Yeah. If Jesus, in Jesus' language, explaining that verse, it would be like this. The church you see is not peripheral to the world, which means the church is in the focus and the world is in the peripheral. And if you're not careful, church, you'll get it backwards. There's a lot of dyslexic Christians in the world today. And what does that mean? They've got the world in their focus, and somehow out here in the peripheral, they're aware that there's something spiritual going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're aware that, oh yeah, there is that church over there, and they're not really focused on the church. They're focused on the world. And the Bible says that Jesus, it's clear that he's running the whole thing, and at the center of all this, he's put the church. And the church is not peripheral to the world, but the world is peripheral to the church. Do you understand that? Just get your mind wrapped around that for just a second, and then I'll move on to something interesting. The world is not peripheral to it's so easy for you and I to get focused and put it in. I'll give you an example. This is my wife, Tammy. We've been married for almost 100 years. 27 years. This is going to be 28 years. How many of you know, for me to have a successful marriage, I've got to have her in the right place in my life? If she's not in my focus, she's in my peripheral, how many know my marriage is in deep sushi? Deep sushi means I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble if I don't keep her in the right place in my life. I got to keep her in my focus. And how many of you know Pastor keeps her in his focus? Yeah. Better. But if I get her in my peripheral, and honestly, men, a lot of us can be guilty of that. Yeah. We know our wife isn't going anywhere, at least we think. We have her in the peripheral, and we put a lot of stuff in the focus. We put her in the peripheral, and then we wonder why the wheels have just fallen off our marriage. Yeah. Jesus is in the church building business. He's building a church. In John chapter 4, verse 34, Jesus said, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." My desire, my will, what I'm all about is about building this church. Jesus said this in Matthew 16:8. Jesus said, "I will build my church." Again, we see he's in the church building business. John chapter 18, verse 37, Jesus said, "For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world." Again, we can see that Jesus is in the church building business. What does that mean? In Jesus' language, it would be, the church is in his focus. The world is in his peripheral. He's about building church. Building the church is not a side thing. That's why he used the words, at the center of it all, Christ rules the church.